All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Brice. I'm a Flix Technical Product Manager at Foundry. And today I'll be sharing some news on what we've been up to over the past year or two for Flix. But first, let's just have a quick look at what Flix is and why is it exactly that we need it. And that's why we need it. Pre-production is chaotic. It's really chaotic, and it's chaotic for a few different reasons that I'll be going through. So first, it's very fast-paced. Story artists just work really, really quickly. It's really hard to keep track of all the files that get created, communicate all those changes to editorial, make sure all the notes from your directors, executives, and heads of story are taken into account, and all that in a really short amount of time. Second one is that those notes have to be addressed, right? So that will lead to hundreds of revisions per sequence, obviously, and that's also very hard to keep track of. Dispersed teams, so these days no one wants to work at the office anymore. Everyone just wants to work from home, right? So it makes it even harder to keep everything in the same place and have everyone on the same page at all times. And finally, everyone has different workflows. Everyone works differently. So that means everyone has a different set of tools that they'd rather be using. Some people want to board in Photoshop, some in Storyboard Pro, TV Paint, Sketchbook Pro, even pen and paper. So each of those has its advantages, but it's really hard in a pipeline to accommodate for all of those. So how does Flix help with all of that? So first, file management. Flix will automatically organize and name all of your files for you, so that you don't have to. Story artists, they just don't want to think about naming conventions, where to save files on the server, and stuff like that. They just want to be drawing, right? And that's what Flix allowed. You just pop up your favorite sketching app, click one button, draw, click one button, send everything to Flix, and at that point, your boards are organized and they're available to everyone in the production. And I guess that's a good transition to the second part, collaboration. So Flix is a central hub, right? It sits in the middle of your pipeline. Everything sent to Flix from whatever third-party application is available immediately to everyone to review, edit, add notes, and that also goes for remote artists. So maybe your artists aren't going to be at the studio, but they still can launch Flix remotely, load up a show or a sequence, and have access to everything as if they were right in the studio. And finally, third-party app integrations. So out of the box, Flix integrates with Photoshop, Storyboard Pro, and TV Paint animation in terms of sketching. And for editorial, we integrate with Avid, Premiere, and Final Cut. So that means artists and editors can use the apps that they're the most comfortable with out of the box without any need to add more custom tools to your pipeline. So basically, this is what Flix is, a collaborative story development hub. So before speaking about Flix 6, I just want to give you a quick history to put everything into context. So back in 2013, Foundry acquired Flix from Sony, just like we did with Katana and Nuke from Digital Domain at the time, and Mari from Weta, for example. And very quickly, we had a lot of interest from a lot of studios. Leica, Rovio, and WAG became the first ones to deploy Flix in their pipeline. And obviously, that led to a lot of feedback, a lot of bug reports, a lot of feature requests, and that led to 5 major releases in the first year. We went from 4.0 to 4.5 in less than 12 months, which is insane. Same thing happened in 2014 when DreamWorks, Paramount, and Blizzard all adopted Flix in their pipeline. And obviously, same thing. We had to keep the bug fixed. We had to keep features coming, like the Adobe Premiere support that we added for DreamWorks TV shows, for example, that was just crucial for them. In 2015, we just added more third-party app support with Storyboard Pro, TV Paint Animation, and Shotgun, just to make sure that Flix stays relevant and is relevant for other markets, such as TV animation, where Toon Boom Storyboard Pro is just huge, and games. And in 2016, really exciting, finally, the first feature films to have ever used the commercial version of Flix have been released, starting with the Angry Birds movie from Rovio and Sony, followed by Kubo from Leica, Storks from WAG, and Trolls from DreamWorks. So as of today, after 14 releases, all these productions using Flix in our pipeline, it's really awesome to see for us. But then we're not the ones making the movies. These guys are, and you guys are. So we're just making the software. So you might ask, what have we been up to over the past year? And we've been busy. All right, we've been busy building Flix, building a new Flix, a whole new Flix. And obviously, rewriting a complex tool like that is not trivial. It takes a lot of time. So finally, we're at a stage where we can share some news with you, some screenshots and stuff like that, and even do live demos if anyone is interested after the show. So historically, Flix has always been one app installed on a shared drive that you had to mount on both the servers and the workstations, running in different contexts, but it's just one app doing all the same things. Flix 6 is going to be different. So we're splitting it into 2 different apps that are specific to the specific tasks that they have to do, right? So the Flix client is going to be for the end users, and the Flix server is going to be there to run on the servers. So splitting Flix into 2 means we don't have to compromise on the technology we use anymore. We don't need to use technology that allows us to do both server stuff and client stuff. We can just use the best set of tools for the Flix client and the best set of tools for the Flix server. And it also allows us to remove complexity from the client side, which obviously will make Flix easier for end users to adopt. So the main reason behind the rewrite was really Flash going away in 2020. So Flix's front end is in Flash. So obviously we had to move away from that, and we went for an Angular Electron framework that basically allows us to build a modern desktop, native desktop app using modern web technologies. That really allows us to develop more quickly and be more responsive to feedback as a result. It also allows us to have a level of automated testing which just wasn't possible with Flix 5. So it should result in a more stable software for everyone at the end of the day. And finally, we're also moving from running in a web browser. So Flix 5 used to run in Google Chrome. So now it's a self-contained app. So that means we have direct access to the operating system's features, such as the file system, the notifications, multiple windows, and all that good stuff. So we don't need to work around browser limitations, which slowed us down a lot in terms of development before. So just like for the client, with the server, we're just using the best set of tools we have available. So that will result in just faster and easier deployments and easier for you guys to maintain. We're also moving from a file-based system to a database, which will definitely help with speed, just because reading, writing, and listing files is always slow. It's always going to be slow. So now we can store data in a more logical and organized way. We're also using a RESTful API now. So all the calls from the client to the server will be done through an API. That means you can easily make those calls as well to extend Flix and customize it to your production's needs. And obviously, it's just a couple of REST calls, so you can do that with any programming language. So yes, it's a brand new app, but don't worry, it's still the same app the same Flix that you all know and love, right? So we have a lot of users who've been using Flix for a while at this point, so we really need them to be able to jump on Flix 6 and be able to just work as if it's exactly the same. So to prove this, let's just have a look at an example. So we took something that looked like this, right? So that's Flix 5.4 that was released a couple of months ago at this point. So this is the main interface, and we turned it into something which looks like this. So first thing you'll see is that it's very similar, right? It looks pretty much the same. And again, the whole point is for it to be intuitive to existing users and easy to pick up for newcomers. We also made sure that the workflows remain the same. We don't want story artists to have to relearn how to use Flix along with their favored sketching app. So for example, with Photoshop, on the left, you can see the Flix 5 actions. On the right, the Flix 6 actions. So we actually use the exact same scripts between 5 and 6 so that the way to work is going to be the exact same for you. However, we used to have just the Photoshop actions, whereas now we're taking advantage of Adobe's CEP panels, which just gives us so much more control over our integration with Flix. An example of that control, extra control that we get is just the aspect ratio. So if you look at the top, the blue and purple actions, we have 8 of them just to create new templates and new thumbnails. We now just have 2 just because of that aspect ratio dropdown. You can just set your aspect ratio once. It will be stored in the Photoshop references, so next time you open it, it will remember that, and you won't be boarding in the wrong aspect ratio anymore. Same thing for editorial. It's going to be the same process to go to Premiere, come back from Premiere. To go to Premiere, just click on one button. It will generate the PDF, the contact sheet for everyone. It will send an email to everyone who's on that mailing list and generate an XML you can just drag and drop into Premiere to reconform your edits. And to go back into Flix, all you have to do is just generate a movie and an XML, give them to Flix, and it will take care of rendering the effects, reconforming the whole edit with the shots that have moved, all the effects, and all that stuff. But obviously, we're still trying to make it better. So it should be the same for the end user, but we're still trying to make it better, right? So let's go through some of the improvements that we've brought to Flix 6 and a couple of things, new things that we've added as well. So first off, panel properties. So now we can actually display metadata for the selected panel, like the artist name and the date created. And that's one of the advantages of using a database on the backend. It's really easy to gather data and to access data like that. And we really plan to gather as much metadata as possible when sending stuff to Flix from whatever third-party app. And you can even you'll even be able to add your own metadata by just tagging panels with certain keywords to then easily search them, and will all be displayed there. We also made some huge improvements to our library, which is now fully searchable. Again, thanks to the database on the backend that just allows us to easily access panel info pretty quickly. In Flix 5, you could only search for panels if you knew the panel ID. So unless you actually know that, it makes it really, really hard to find your panels. Some artists will actually rather draw it from scratch again rather than go in there and actually find it, which is impressive because it's going to be the exact same pattern at the end of the day, but it's not really efficient. All right, whereas now you can actually access panels from different sequences, which wasn't possible in Flix 5. You can just now pull panels from one sequence to another just using this dropdown. You can also filter by artist. So if you know who created a board, you can easily find only their boards and not anyone else's, for example. And finally, by date range. So if you have a rough idea of when those boards were created, you can easily look at that. If you know who did it, it's pretty easy to find everything that you're looking for that was ever sent to Flix. Other enhancements that we added, another area that we really improved is the player. So first off, we added some color palette and brush thickness settings to our drawn tools. So before you could only draw in one thickness with one color that was black, which wasn't always obvious whether it was a note or something part of the panel. Whereas now you can change color and color thickness, so you just have, color and brush thickness, so you have more control over your drawn notes. Another thing is that we got rid of the pitch mode, which was basically a full screen mode. So we replaced that just a single button that's full screen. You can see at the bottom, you can tell it's full screen because the control is slightly smaller. And that means that both the docked player and the one full screen are the same component. So all the features are available both in your story workspace and in full screen. So for example, you can now record your audio and your timing directly from your story workspace. In Flix 5, you could do that from the picture workspace, which was fine. You could just record a rough timing before sending it to editorial, but you didn't have a view with the panel browser of the whole sequence in context. So that will help navigate through panels and make sure you get the pace right during your pitch. Also very important, you can now have the audience at the bottom of the docked player. And it might look like a stupid feature, but story artists really like it to give them some perspective on what they're drawing, making it for the big screen. So it actually makes a lot of sense. And finally, subtitles. So now we can add whatever dialogue you have can appear directly in the viewer. Back in Flix 5, you used to have the dialogue right below the viewer and the player controls underneath, which wasn't ideal. I think the player controls just belong right under the player. But story artists really want to have the dialogue close to the image because it's some kind of visual cue as you go through your sequence. Speaking of dialogue, something else that we introduced is dialogue revisions. So the whole mentality behind Flix is that it's non-destructive. Everything you send to Flix will never get overwritten. And there's one area in which that wasn't always true, and that was dialogue where it could get overwritten, unfortunately. So we got a lot of feedback for that, and to solve it, we introduced dialogue revisions. And that means you can easily access previous versions of the dialogue based on when it was entered. So still on the dialogue, we actually added some text styling as well to add some weight to your dialogue, like bold, italic, and underline, which is pretty standard. Another thing that's brand new, user preferences. So as crazy as it might sound, we didn't have user preferences in Flix 5. If you wanted to do something for one artist, everyone else in the production had to adapt to that. So everything was set at the studio and show level. Obviously, you'll still have some settings that need to be at the studio or show level, but some things just need to be customized on a per user basis. So now that means you can choose, for example, Photoshop as your default sketching app, and it won't change it for others if they use Toon Boom Storyboard Pro, for example. It also means you can work using Photoshop's timeline, for example. Even though everyone else in your production wants to use delivery comps, you can still do that without affecting their workflow. So it really does look like a small and pretty standard thing, but it's something that was extremely tricky to implement in Flix 5 with the current architecture, which is much, much easier for us to do with Flix 6. And finally, user management. So now you can actually add, edit, and remove users directly from the app. So you'll still be able to link Flix to your Active Directory or LDAP to manage access to shows for different users. But it's also going to be helpful for new studios and productions that get set up that don't necessarily have an Active Directory or LDAP setup and all that stuff. They can just get started, add a few users, give them access to some shows directly from inside the interface. All right, and other things that I can't show right now because it's not been fully implemented in 6 yet. Some will go in 6.0. Some of them will come in future releases in the coming months and weeks and months, I guess. So first, written notes. So you'll be able to directly write notes for each panel. We might even have an activity stream showing everyone's involvement on certain panels. Tagging panels with keywords. So again, I mentioned that earlier. You'll be able to just tag certain panels saying it's taken place in this environment, or maybe it features the following characters. So that means then in your library, you can just type the name of the character, and every panel containing that character would appear in there, if you thought about tagging it, obviously. Then production handoff tools. So basically, these are shot level export plugins. So for example, the publish to shotgun and all that stuff won't come out of the box with 6.0, but with our new API, it's going to make it extremely easy for UTDs to just script using our API, get data out of Flix and publish to Shotgun, F-Track, NEM, or whatever other tracking software you might be using. And more longer term, we're looking at user roles and permissions. So maybe you want your director to only have a view-only access to your sequence and only be able to give notes. Maybe you want certain people to not have access to certain sequences. So that will be something that we're going to be working on in the next few weeks. And finally, in terms of roadmap, so 6.0, we're just going to focus on having Photoshop and Premiere to have a full working tool set with sketching and application and editorial. Sorry, we're planning to have an alpha in early September. September 4th is the official date. It's going to be a private alpha for our current customers, and then a beta and a release in Q4. Obviously, that will depend a lot on the feedback that we get, but I'm sure it'll all be good. Then for 6.1, we're going to reintroduce Avid Media Composer. We're hoping to have an alpha ready in early, probably Q1 2019, and a beta and release coming out in Q2 2019 as well. And for 6.2, we're just going to focus on reintroducing our Storyboard Pro integration. And again, an alpha and beta in Q1, and probably in release Q3 in 2019. All right, and that's all for me. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your SIGGRAPH, and don't hesitate to come grab me or anyone else with a Foundry badge around the booth if you have any questions about Flix. Thank you.